Hi. I am so fascinated by a thing right now. I think there's some bad behavior involved in what I'm about to talk about in this video, but I'm going to try not to be like super critical of people. I don't think anybody involved is an awful human being. I'm treating this largely as a learning experience, and as like an interesting analytical experience, because there are just so many facets of what I'm about to look at and the situation I'm going to look at that I think are incredibly interesting. I think this is a really interesting look at like what goes into making fair rules for competitive play of a game, and how they should or shouldn't be enforced. And I think it's also a really interesting look at emotional manipulation. Um, Not by someone who is necessarily a bad person, but by someone who is themselves very emotional and very intelligent and isn't like exercising the self control required to not then emotionally manipulate the people around them. Um, I don't think anyone here is completely in the wrong. I don't think anyone here is like 100% perfect, awesome, flawless human being. I think everyone I'm talking about is just human, and I think that this is a really fascinating situation to look at. We're going to talk about improperly determining a winner uh, in a game of Magic the Gathering. Improperly determining a winner is the name of a sort of bizarre Magic the Gathering rule, which comes up in conversations about Magic the Gathering every now and then. It's somewhat controversial. First, though, some fun Magic theory. Maybe you don't know Magic the Gathering at all. I want to give you something like very, very basic in Magic the Gathering, which also shows you how deep Magic the Gathering can be. This will be relevant a little bit later on, but I'm kind of just sharing it immediately because I think it's fun and because I want to like set the table of thinking about like it really matters how things get done in a game of Magic the Gathering. Uh, so let's talk about some fun Magic theory. I played Magic a lot through high school in my early 20s, and one thing I did was actually write about stuff like this. And one of my favorite things I ever wrote was an essay about early land drops. If you have all three of these lands in hand, Steam Vents, Shivan Reef, and Island, and you have a card that requires one mana of any color and one red mana that you want to play on turn two, how should you play these two lands? Like, what order should you play them in order to play that card that cost one colorless and one red mana? We need to, if you have no familiarity with Magic at all, we need to have a land that says that it can tap for red, at least one of them. That little symbol that's red means red mana. And then the other land can tap for a colorless mana or a blue mana, also works. So we need to work out some way to have red and one other mana of any sort on turn two with these lands. All right, here's a sample line. We could place Steam Vents, and when we place Steam Vents, it says as Steam Vents enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. So we would place Steam Vents, and we don't want to pay 2 life to just lose 2 life for no reason, so we'd put it into the battlefield tapped. That's why it's important that we play it on turn 1, because on turn 2, it can't be tapped to generate mana. And so we need to play it on turn 1 so that on turn 2 it will untap in our untap step, and then we have Steam Vents and an island. We can make the red with the Steam Vents. We can make a colorless with the island, well, a blue, which is used as a colorless, and we cast our spell. This is pretty good. This is like kind of a default solution, I would say. This is like maybe what you would heuristically think of as the most obvious thing to do as a Magic the Gathering player. Here's a different sample line. We could go Steam Vents tapped on turn 1, and then we could play Shivan Reef. This would cost us 0 health because Shivan Reef, when it adds a blue or a red, it deals 1 damage to us, but we can use it to add a colorless mana, and it doesn't deal any damage to us. So we're taking 0 damage, and we are making a red mana with Steam Vents and a colorless mana with Shivan Reef. Awesome. We get to play our card. And the difference here is that we have a Shivan Reef instead of an island, which means it costs us health to make Blue with Shivan Reef, but we could make a red with Shivan Reef. So if we needed 3 red next turn for some reason, to play something that costs 3 red, or to play 3 different things that cost 1 red, or some other reason, this would let us do that. So it's like just a different option. Depending on what's in our hand, this may be better. Here's another option. We could play Island, and then we could play Shivan Reef. Shivan Reef will deal us 1 damage. To play our card, we'll need to use this to make red, and an island will make colorless. So we're taking 1 damage in this line instead of taking 0 damage. But there is like an upside that we're getting out of taking 1 damage. We are hiding from our opponent that we have access to red mana until turn 2. They may not know that we have red cards in our deck at all. Seeing an island that can only make blue and can't make red may change their decision making in turn 1 or 2 in ways that could be beneficial to us. So, you know, there are some matchups and some formats where that could be a sensible thing to do. There are also like a bunch of other very specific card interactions with like non-basic versus basic lands and stuff like that. This is not meant to be completely exhaustive. Okay, here's another option. We play Shivan Reef on turn 1, and then we play Steam Vents on turn 2. And we pay 2 life, so that Steam Vents enters the battlefield untapped. And we're arriving at the same situation that we had here, where we have Steam Vents and Shivan Reef in play on turn 2, but we've taken 2 damage compared to it. So we've reached the same situation, we've taken 2 damage. Often in Magic, players will call a strategy like this strictly worse than the other strategy. So this one gets us Steam Vents and Shivan Reef into play. This one gets us Shivan Reef and the Steam Vents into play. But this one costs us 2 life and the other costs us 0 life. So this one, a Magic player might say, is strictly worse. It's just like worse. There is no reason you would ever consider it. And that is genuinely what a lot of people would think about this line. But there is a reason to deal ourselves 2 damage. So our opponent understands when they're watching us play the game. In the same way that when we play an island, they understand that we can make blue, but they don't know for sure that we can make red yet. When they see us lead with Shivan Reef, they understand that leading with Shivan Reef instead of Steam Vents means it will take more damage, which means that we have given them a reason to believe that we didn't have Steam Vents in hand on turn 1. That's interesting, right? If they think that we didn't have Steam Vents in hand on turn 1, there are another couple of logical conclusions they can make. One is that we just drew it for turn 2, since we didn't have it in hand turn 1 and now we're playing it. We must have drawn it. That must have been our draw step. And another is that we didn't have a land better than Shivan Reef in hand on turn 1 and don't have a land better to play than Steam Vents in hand right now on turn 2. So all of this information that they're receiving is going to make them think reasonably that we don't have many lands in our hand. It's cost us 2 life to give them that information, but there are matchups where that could be worth it. There are some matchups where it can be right to pay 2 life to convey incorrect information to your opponent. Imagine that you're playing a red deck against a control deck. The control deck is not likely to kill you by dealing 20 damage to you and reducing your life to 0 really quickly. That's probably not how the control deck kills you. It's probably going to kill you by surviving long enough to take control of the game and deploy some really strong threats that are much stronger than what you have, and then beat you. So if your control playing opponent sees you do this and thinks that you don't have many lands in your hand, that is giving them information which could be incorrect. You could deliberately be doing this with lots of lands in your hand, which might make them, say, overvalue a card like Mana Leak, which they think can counter a spell that you play unless you paid 3 mana for it. Spell Pierce is maybe a better example that sees more play these days, I think. That counters a non-creature spell that you play unless you pay 2 more mana for it. They might look at Spell Pierce in their hand and think that card's really good here because my opponent is short on mana. So they're not going to be able to get through the Spell Pierce. Whereas in actuality, you may have plenty of mana to get through Spell Pierce, and your plan is just to never let them play Spell Pierce profitably, you're always going to have 2 mana available every time you play a non-creature spell, which is a possible thing that you might be able to do, maybe. There are like 2 things that this does. One, when we actually are really mana light, it throws some doubt into our opponent's minds. They can't be as certain that we don't have any lands in hand, because sometimes we might act like we don't have many lands in hand. And the other thing is that like it just directly makes them think that we have fewer lands in hand in this game when we're doing it right now. So this is a thing that you can do in Magic the Gathering. It's a very complicated game. You can think about like ranges of ways you play certain lines, certain combination of cards. In any given matchup, if you were to play 100 times, it is possible that you would want to mix these strategies. So sometimes you would want to play this way, and sometimes you would want to play this way, even if you had both available. Like maybe you'd play the strictly worse way like 10 times or something, and the point is, yeah, you're taking 2 damage 10 times, but you're casting doubt into your opponent's mind about whether you have lands or not available in your hand when you actually do have to lead with Shaven Reef and are actually landlight. And that's like a reasonable price to pay, and also sometimes you're misleading your opponent into playing wrong against you when you have plenty of lands, which is also beneficial. Magic's really complicated, and the early turns of Magic, where like each player knows next to nothing about what the other player has in their hand and exactly what's going to happen next, are like very complicated in a very unique way, having to do with information being hidden and how quickly it gets revealed and how that changes what each player is going to do. This is important to understand for later somewhat, but also I just like wanted to talk about how cool Magic was for a bit. Anyway, what is improperly determining a winner? This is a quite simply stated rule in Magic the Gathering. IPG 4.3. What does IPG stand for? Infraction Procedure Guide. There you go. This is a guide for what to do if someone exhibits unsporting conduct improperly determining a winner. And what this rule says is the definition of improperly determining a winner is that a player uses or offers to use a method that is not part of the current game, including actions not legal in the current game, to determine the outcome of a game or match. If the player was aware that what they were doing was against the rules, the infraction is unsporting conduct cheating. And this says that improperly determining a winner carries a penalty of match loss, whereas, for what it's worth, unsporting conduct cheating carries a penalty of disqualification for the tournament. So if you knowingly do this, you get disqualified from the tournament. If the judges realize that you knowingly did it, you should, according to the rules, get disqualified from the tournament if the judges successfully enforce them. So, what does that actually mean? Well, one of the simplest examples of what it means is I can't be playing a game with my opponent and like flip a coin to see who wins. I can't be like, I don't feel like playing this game with you. I want to flip a coin. If it's heads, I win. If it's tails, you win. Does that sound good to you? Opponent says yes. I flip a coin. It's heads. I say I win. A judge comes up to it and says, actually, no, you both get match losses. You're not allowed to do that. Which, like, sure, I guess, but a question that kind of seems reasonable is why? If people are playing in a Magic the Gathering tournament and both of them agree that they'd like to settle a game in some way other than playing the game of Magic, why does that have to mean that they get a match loss? Some people think that there should be a reason for this. I wonder, like, it's interesting because, like, I feel like this is a kind of default assumption in almost every sort of competitive thing that exists. Like if baseball teams didn't play a game of baseball against each other and instead flipped a coin to decide who won the game of baseball, like there would be problems. but there's a more direct attachment to the baseball game actually being played, and that being important in baseball than there is in Magic. Like in baseball, in the major leagues, we're talking about the highest rules enforcement level of Magic. So we're talking about like the Pro Tour, people playing for $100,000 sorts of things. We're not talking about just your like kitchen table Magic. There aren't going to be judges there probably. Um, but yeah, in like Major League Baseball, if the Seattle Mariners and New York Yankees just decided they weren't going to play baseball one day and were instead going to flip a coin to see who won, that would understandably kind of mess with, broadcasters who have rights to the game and fans who bought tickets and stuff like that. And yeah, a lot of people would be pissed off about it, and it's kind of obvious why they have to actually play baseball. Even when the game is like beyond a doubt over already, we still expect them to keep on playing until the game is actually over. We do not generally smile upon teams who like try to end the game faster by everybody just goes up and strikes out or something like that. That would kind of be considered unsportsmanlike. There's a sense in baseball that you are there to actually play baseball. Is kind of what I feel like. But in Magic the Gathering, maybe there isn't always quite that same sense. Sometimes in Magic the Gathering tournaments in particular, people are kind of thinking, I'm here to win the Magic the Gathering tournament, which doesn't require me to actually play all of my games of Magic. I might want to intentionally draw a game of Magic because a draw was enough to qualify me for the top 8 or something like that. And if I can get a win against my opponent by doing something other than playing Magic, of course I should, because the goal is to win. The goal is not as clearly to play Magic, and there's somewhat of a like detachment from the importance of playing the games of Magic in minds at times. So anyway, that all said, I think why is actually irrelevant to all of that. I think the reason this rule exists is that Magic the Gathering occupies a fascinating space in friction with laws in the large number of legislative systems. Magic is wild. This is a game. It's a card game where you like shuffle your deck and draw cards. And then results can obviously be decided by the luck of the draw because you shuffled your deck and you're like drawing cards randomly from it. And prizes can be awarded to players, and minors are advertised to and encouraged to play this game. Which, like, does that sound like poker to you at all? Or, like, maybe blackjack or other types of gambling games? There's some separation because we're not actually wagering the prizes during the game, but we're still in a tournament where you get prizes at the end if you did well, which is how tournament poker works for what it's worth. Like, the chips you bet in tournament poker aren't dollars, they are your playing pieces for the tournament. And then you win money based on how far you get in the tournament. So like, Magic the Gathering is in this very awkward space legislatively. And like, my understanding is that a result is that Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro have had some very particular policies about what can and cannot be done or said at Magic events and about Magic in general. And this rule in particular tries to make it very clear that behaviors like flipping a coin to decide who wins cannot be done, which helps to distance the game from gambling. The rule also cares somewhat about the integrity of the tournament and the fact that we are here at the tournament in order to play Magic the Gathering. That is an important thing to do. Another example of a weird policy that Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro have, there's a huge secondary market for Magic cards. They're collectible. You like open them in booster packs, and if you get a really rare one, which is highly sought after, it can sell for like $100 or $1 million. Like, I think recently a Magic Gathering card sold for $2 million or something like that. That's very, very, very unusual, but not unheard of. Wizards like just outright doesn't acknowledge that cards have a secondary market anywhere very deliberately, because at least in my understanding, it's very important to Wizards not to acknowledge that cards have value for legal reasons. So, that's interesting. Because, yeah, when kids sit down to do a draft of Magic the Gathering cards and open up packs to pull cards out of them, if one of those cards is worth $50, well, that sounds a bit like a slot machine, doesn't it? Is that worth examining? I don't know. I don't know. It's a fascinating little thing. Okay. Why part two, improperly determining winner, is also a rule which attempts to protect the integrity of Magic tournaments. I would say that I think a good summary of the philosophy behind the rule is we want to make it very clear that at Magic tournaments, the only thing that decides who gets prizes is who wins games of Magics. And games of Magic are games of skill. They're not gambling. Which is, a claim, and largely true. I mostly agree. Some elements kind of similar to gambling, though. Maybe just gambling sometimes. Anyway, so that's fine. That's improperly determining a winner. Kind of a weird rule, but like not completely outlandish in terms of competitive sports and other games, and sensible-ish reasons why it might have to exist, even if they are somewhat unique and peculiar. Improperly determining a winner, which I'm going to call IDW from now on, is very strict. Very strict. So I would say that it's likely because of it being a place as a stopgate against gambling laws. IDW doesn't provide much wiggle room for interpretation by judges. I haven't seen IDW be interpreted very leniently by judges ever. I have seen several situations where games were stopped while judges conferred, and then a player got a match loss, where a lot of people watching were like, "What just happened? Like, why?" And the reason is often because the player did or said something which the judges believed was reasonably construed as an IDW, which a normal person watching the tournament didn't think was that outlandish at all. But the judges are pretty on the ball with enforcing this sort of stuff, in my experience, and for reasons that I think I already explained. At least that's my understanding. Here's an example of how strict IDW can be. So this is a real example that was related to me recently. A player with Sensei's Divining Top in play. Sensei's Divining Top has an ability which lets you look at the top 3 cards of your library and then put them back in any order. Shows their opponent their top 3 cards in order to help the two decide whether it's reasonable for one to concede to the other after they run out of time to complete their match at the end of the round. So unlike in baseball, where you keep playing until somebody wins, for the most part, unless it rains or whatever. People who play games outside, the fools. Anyway, Magic can end in draws. You have a time limit to finish your match, and if you don't get it done in that time limit, you get usually 5 extra turns shared between the two of you, and then if you don't finish within those 5 turns, it's just a draw. And often draws are not good for you in tournaments. A win is worth 3 points, a loss is worth 0 points, and a draw is worth 1 point in a lot of tournament structures. And because of that, 2 players drawing nets 2 points out of that match of Magic, whereas 1 player winning and 1 player losing nets 3 points. And if you have 2 players playing against each other, they would rather get to share 3 points than get to share 2 points in most situations. So often players do not want to draw. That's kind of a default assumption. You don't build decks to take to tournaments if you know that it's going to be really hard to play the deck fast enough to get a conclusive result for a match. This actually has affected which decks get brought to tournaments or which cards get put in them in the past in Magic, because there are some strategies which just take a very, very long time to play within the rules of the game, and so if you bring that deck to a tournament, you're just going to get lots of draws because you can't finish your matches, and then you and your opponents are going to do poorly in the tournament. So here we are at the end of extra turns, and the players have finished playing their extra turns, and now they're discussing whether one of them would like to concede, which is the thing they're allowed to do. You're allowed to concede. If let's say you're friends with your opponent and you're going to get a draw, and you know that this is bad for both of you, and you can tell that your opponent is winning the game, you can be yeah, I'll concede, you can have the win. That seems fair. And, you create some sort of iterative prisoner's dilemma out of this kind of thing where you hope that other people will concede to you if you're in the same sort of position, and together, by cooperating, you can reach this ideal state where the person who seems to be ahead gets given the win instead of both of you getting a draw. And while admittedly that sounds a lot like you're like resolving games of Magic but not actually finishing games of Magic, um, Wizards doesn't say that you're not allowed to do that. The extension of like, no, it's actually important that you finish your game of Magic uh, does not go that far. It's like in baseball, if the Major League Baseball commissioner said you get a draw if you're tied at the end of 9 innings, but it's okay if one of you concedes for some reason, like that the pitcher you have on the mound is worse, or one of you has the better rotation through the batting lineup coming up, or something like that. It would be okay if you conceded there, which would create very weird situations in baseball, I imagine. And we don't have that in baseball, but we do have it in Magic. So anyway, this player had Sensei's Divining Top in play. So they were looking at the board state and trying to decide, like, is it reasonable for one of us to concede to the other here? And they look at the top 3 cards of their library and show their opponent. Because Sensei's Divining Top says, like, it has an ability that lets you look at the top 3 cards of your library and then put them back in any order. So the top 3 cards of the player's library are, like, conceptually for the player, part of the game state, which could be looked at in order to make this decision. They got an IDW for doing that. Both of them got a match loss. The player is not currently allowed to look at their top 3 cards because Divining Top's ability isn't active. Like, it costs 1 mana to activate it, and they're not even playing the game anymore, right? Like, they've finished extra turns, like, they're done. They can't pay 1 mana for that ability. So showing those cards is not an action legal in the current game. And if we go back to the definition of improperly determining a winner, the definition is a player uses or offers to use a method that's not part of the current game, including actions not legal in the current game. That's an action not legal in the current game. IDW, match loss. Very strict. Very strict, very weird segment of Magic rules, but at least, to my understanding, quite consistently enforced. So, isn't that kind of unreasonably strict? Like, yeah, I think it kind of is. It's a lot. The entire thing is kind of gray all over, though. Like, where you set the line exactly is, it's I can't say it's arbitrary because it's highly dependent on like multiple different things. It's just there are so many different things it's dependent on that saying where the line should be drawn is kind of hard to do. And like ultimately, I think all you can really do is like observe where the line has been drawn and abide by that line. So yeah, it's kind of strict probably, but it is also what the rule is. And if you play tournament Magic, you'll want to keep in mind that judges are meant to enforce it. So rules often fail to perfectly navigate the nuance of real-life situations because of the requirement that they enforceably achieve something. This is just like an interesting thing about rules. You would love to be able to settle every instance in life with perfect nuance and fairness. However, if somebody is going to write a rule about something, say like jaywalking or something like that, they have to actually write a rule that can be enforced by people that like says there is something that has to be done. And maybe there's like wriggle room in how a rule is enforced. And different rules usually have different amounts of wriggle room here. Like jaywalking has more wriggle room than vehicular homicide, which itself has more wriggle room than murder. This took a grim twist suddenly, but that is what it is. But yeah, I don't think IDW has a lot of wriggle room. It has like a pretty important strict purpose for Wizards, so I haven't observed judges having much leniency with it. And because of that, it's going to be kind of strict sometimes and going to feel a little bit unfair sometimes. And IDW's purpose is to make sure people are deciding their matches of Magic by playing Magic, and it's hard to implement a rule which is straightforward enough to be enforceable. It does that without it hitting some false positives. What's a false positive? Well, there are false positives and there are false negatives. False positive is like you took a test for a cold and it said you had a cold, but you didn't actually have a cold. Weird. But perhaps in like more visceral and important terms, a big false positive that we care about in our world is, say, someone's on trial for murder. We're going back to murder again. And the jury convicts them when they didn't do it. That's pretty bad. In setting up our society, culturally, we decided that for situations in criminal courts, avoiding false positive was very important because the all-powerful government is like taking away the rights and freedom of a citizen, and that is a thing of great weight to do. And so in the criminal justice system, we really want to avoid false positives, and so we have like something called the reasonable doubt, and you can only convict someone if they are shown to have done something beyond a reasonable doubt. Compare this to civic trials, where you actually only have to show that it's more than 50% likely that something's true for a ruling to go a certain way. In a civic trial, which is like a case disputed between two citizens, we don't care as much about false positives because the gravity of what's happening if we reach a false positive isn't as big a deal. It just doesn't have as much weight. So in Magic the Gathering, when we have rules distancing the game from gambling laws, we probably don't care that much about false positives because players can just read the rules and then not do the things that the rules forbid, right? The players have agency to avoid false positives, especially if they're playing for like $100,000. They could read the rule set ahead of time and make sure that they understood it and didn't break it. You would think, especially the infractions which carry a match loss, which like there aren't many infractions that carry a match loss or disqualification. These are major penalties, and so there are very few rules that carry those penalties. And yeah, I would say that expecting players to read the rules and abide by them is a minor inconvenience compared to if tournaments for the game got banned from the entire jurisdiction that the players lived in. That seems like it would be worse for the players. It would also be worse for Wizards. So in this case, we're being a lot more strict with the rule because we don't care as much about false positives. We're caring more about what happens with a false negative, which in this case, like in the murder example, it would be if there was a murderer and they got set free, which we don't think is as important in a murder trial in our society as if there is a not murderer who is convicted for murder. We think the false negative is less bad than the false positive. That's why we've set up our judiciary system that we have. Yeah, and I guess like the false negative in this situation is like Magic gets banned from the jurisdiction that you live in, which is hefty. Heftier than like you have to read and remember the rules. Okay, so false positives versus false negatives. Let's look at another situation of IDW improperly determining a winner. This is the IDW that the video is actually about. Situation. You are in a competitive Magic the Gathering tournament. There are $130,000 in the prize pool. Significant prize pool. There are, I think, like 1,200 players in this tournament. So on average, that's like $100 per player. This is a significant tournament. And you have this board state on turn 3 of the final game against an opponent with 20 health, but only 1 land. You got a couple of creatures out. You have 2 mana still available to play some more spells this turn, probably 1 more spell. They're at 20 life, but you can reasonably kill them in like 2 or 3 turns. You're a pretty aggressive green-red deck. You have other cards in your hand. They're not stated in the example that was given, but, you know, reasonable to think that we have some. And you're choosing which spell to play next. When your opponent says, can I look at my top card? If it's not a land, I'm just going to scoop. Scoop means like concede. What should you do? Do 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 do. So this is an IDW. And what your opponent just did, rules wise, is a match loss for them. IDW doesn't say that we have to actually use the method proposed. It just says a player offers to use a method that is not part of the current game, including actions not legal in the current game, to determine the outcome of a game of match. So what has just happened, breaking it down, can I look at my top card? You're not allowed to do that in Magic. You aren't allowed to look at the top card of your library whenever you want. It's not public information. Go back here. The player is not currently allowed to look at their top 3 cards with Sensei's Divining Top. Not allowed to do that right now. If it's not a land, I'm just going to scoop. Now, there's nothing like malicious about this. I don't assume. Our opponent here, I'm gonna place us in the situation of the person playing the green-red deck and say that our opponent is like not doing well. They only have 1 land out, which means they missed land drops. And they're at 20 life, sure, but we've deployed some creatures which get pretty strong pretty quickly, and we're playing an aggressive deck, so they reasonably think they're going to lose pretty soon, and they want to just get it over with real quick by checking the top card, and if it's a land, they want to concede. Nothing malicious at all. The IDW rule is strict, and this breaks it. This is an action that is not legal in the game that they are playing, and they're clearly stating that they are going to determine the result of the game by taking that action. So this is an IDW. And I think that, like, if you don't start with emotional involvement in this story, and you just start with like a reading of what improperly determining a winner is, and a look at what another example of improperly determining a winner was, and then you look at this situation, you can see like, yeah, okay, I see. That is improperly determining a winner. Very strict rule. This one feels like a false positive, right? A very strict rule, penalty match loss. That sucks. But you know, we have to have rules, they have to be enforced, and it is within the player's power to read the rules and make sure that they don't do stuff like this. So it's not a happy situation. Like, it's not cool, but our opponent just IDW'd, and now we're sitting here wondering what to respond to what they've said. And I want to like mention that you as a player don't have to call a judge. The Magic rules are currently not set up with a requirement that if this happens in the match you're playing, you have an obligation to notify a judge of it to get your opponent a match loss. You can, if you think that IDW is unnecessarily strict, or even if just like asking a judge for a match win doesn't sit right with you, like maybe you are one of those people who thinks, I'd really like to play out the game of Magic, I'm going to forgive my opponent, like offering to break a rule, well, literally breaking a rule, but you know, I'm going to say I can mitigate the harm of what just happened there. That's not a big deal. Let's finish playing the game of Magic. That's what I'm actually here to do. That's like, you have some form of integrity that makes you feel like that's right. Like that's a thing that's okay. You can just say no to your opponent. Don't do that. You could say, wait a sec, my turn is almost over. You'll get to see the next card of your deck when you get to your turn, when you draw a card. Fine. You know, these are things you can do. Even if you want to call a judge, you don't have to make a huge deal out of it. Breaking rules of tournament Magic isn't like shameful. It doesn't make you a bad person. It's like understandable. The rules are like somewhat complex and arcane and sometimes like very strict in very precise ways that are not maybe intuitive to you. And they also like change over time. So even if you were familiar with them a while ago, they may be different now than what you're used to. So like, yeah, like that's okay. It's fine. You don't have to make a big deal out of it. You don't have to like call them a cheater. You can just communicate to a judge, hey, I don't think my opponent meant anything malicious here, but they offered to improperly determine the winner of the game by offering or asking if they could look at the top card of the library when it was an illegal game action, and then decide to concede if it was not a land, which isn't allowed. Distinction that I think is important, because like people get really nitty gritty with the phrasing of this and stuff. This says to determine the outcome of a game or match, but that doesn't mean that it changes the outcome of a game or match. So like, very likely your opponent would have lost anyway if they stayed on one land as you continued to play your green and red deck and slaughtered them. Like, sure, very likely, extremely likely, not quite 100%, but like close to 100%, they were going to lose if this wasn't a land anyway. So using this method to choose to concede, I guess, is not changing the result of the match, but it is determining what the result of the match is. That's how you're determining it. You're looking at a card, and if it is a land, you're conceding. You're determining whether to concede by looking at the card. You're not allowed to look at the card. It's an illegal game action. This is an IDW. Very upsetting. Miserable, for sure. Precise rule. That's just not Magic, etc., etc., etc. Part of the tournament rule set, clearly stated, carries a match loss penalty. That's where we're at. Okay, so false positive. Yeah, false positive. False positive. Yeah. Worth noting, by the way, in this situation, your opponent was likely going to lose the match anyway. That's where we started all of this, in fact, right? Like, they already said, like, I'm feeling like I'm really busted here. I'd like to just look at the top card, make sure it isn't like a land that gives me some chance back in, and so I can concede and get on with my life. They're already halfway out the door. So like, it's not even that big a deal to get them a match loss. Like, sure, match loss. You lose match. Maybe some consequences if like they do the same thing further down the line, but hopefully like this is an opportunity for a judge to clarify what the rule means exactly, so they won't do it again. But maybe you don't know that it's an IDW either, because you don't necessarily know that. It's a very particular rule, and you may not have read it or may not have like thought particularly about it coming up in this exact situation, and so it may not like light bulb may not go off on your head. Wait a second, that's an IDW. We can't do this. The Yankees cannot just like send Babe Ruth up to bat 3 batters before he's meant to go and say, if he doesn't get a home run, we're just going to concede. That's not baseball. In the context of baseball, you're like, yeah, that does seem like a thing they shouldn't do. But in the context of Magic, maybe you're like, yeah, but like the rules of Magic are a bit flexible. You know, me and my opponent, we're here. It's more about us determining the result in a way that seems fair to us. The actual playing of the game of Magic exactly by the rules doesn't matter quite as much. We can be a bit flexible. Maybe that's kind of like what you're thinking. And so maybe you don't know that it's an IDW either. That puts you in a really gross situation, like significantly more gross than your opponent was in, because you were about to win the match. But if you agree to do this, you are also improperly determining the winner. Like, you're agreeing with your opponent to use this method to determine the outcome of the match, which means that now you're both IDWing and you're both going to get a match loss, which is a big time oof. That is rough. It is important to know the rules of a tournament you're playing with a $130,000 prize pool, right? Like, that is a thing which is presumably within your power and important. But it's like totally understandable that you don't know all of them, or you make a mistake with one of them here. Like, this doesn't necessarily like reasonably read as your fault. Like, I don't know if you have to beat yourself out about this, but if you do agree, you are about to become a false positive in a way which was quite unfortunate to you and perhaps even quite upsetting to you. Is there anything you can do then? Well, you could have like some defaults like set in your mind which kind of like protected you from things like this. You could like say no just because like your opponent's asking to break a rule of Magic, and you could think like this is a really major tournament for like $100,000+, and my opponent's like asking just casually to break a rule, but I do feel like probably we shouldn't break the rules in a tournament with that much money at stake. Like you could think something like that. You could also think like this is a really weird thing for my opponent to ask me. I'm not quite sure what I meant to do here. I should call a judge. This is a thing that judges are available for. You can stick up your hand in a Magic tournament and say, "Judge!" And the judge will come over and you can explain the situation. The judge will help. In this case, unfortunately, for your opponent, the judge will likely give your opponent a match loss. But, you know, you'll get a match win. So, and that's probably what was going to happen anyway. Like, we're resolving the thing the way it was likely to turn out. This is not a huge tragedy for you to solve the situation that way. You could, of course, also say yes, mistakenly thinking that it's an irrelevant thing, and IDW, which would be too bad. Likely, though, for what it's worth, if you did that, like if a judge isn't looking over your shoulder or listening, or maybe a judge who is looking over your shoulder and listening doesn't pick up on the fact that this is an IDW, because again, it's a pretty like precise rule which doesn't come up in this exact situation very often, and so even a judge might overlook it. Maybe you'll get lucky. Like even if you say yes, this might not blow up in your face. Yeah, so obviously we IDW'd here, or I wouldn't be making the video about it, right? That's what happened. So we said yes. Look at the top card of your library. Our opponent saw a card that wasn't a land. They conceded. We sat and chatted with them after the match, and then a judge came up to us both and said, "Hey, do you know what you just did was wrong?" And we were like, "No." The reason the judge asks that is that if people do know that it's wrong, it's a disqualification, right? The penalty upgrades. But, you know, we say that we didn't know that it was wrong, and the judge says, "All right, I'm going to give both of you a match loss." This is just like very rote, professional enforcement of this rule, which exists and requires rote and professional enforcement. So what happens now? Now we're being told we get a match loss. Well, we can appeal a decision. So we can do that and get another judge's opinion, maybe. Okay. So we did that in the example. And we got two other judges to confirm this is an IDW. So now what do? We lose the match, I guess. I guess the match is lost. So we've gotten our fourth loss, which makes it quite unlikely we can get any prizes anymore. And I guess we can drop out of the tournament if we want, or we can play on and hope to get lucky, or just enjoy playing Magic. Maybe we like playing Magic, and maybe the reason we're at the tournament isn't to like get prizes, it's because we enjoy playing games of Magic with people, and so we're going to keep playing Magic. That is a thing you're allowed to do. Yeah, we probably didn't do that either, because I wouldn't be making the video if we'd just done that, huh? So instead, we well, let me just read this account of what we did. It's over. No PT, no epic run, no more fire, no more hope. Point blank. You won, but you're done anyway, kid. Should have continued the beating. Shouldn't have been so human there. Your opponent was suffering, but that's not your problem. I lost. I am lost. It's at this point that I finally allow my emotions to overtake me. So far, I've been firm but fair while holding back tears. But this tournament that I gave everything for is now over for me, and none of them care. Every moment with the judges has been cold and calculated. Every "I understand" has echoed with emptiness. I slam my fist on the table directly in front of myself and tensely shout something to the effect of "This is absurd," and get out of there as efficiently as possible. I did not shout at anyone. I did not shout in anyone's face. My face followed my fist as I shouted into the abyss. I pick up my backpack and I'm gone. A few steps down the center hallway and I lock eyes with one of my friends and sternly state, "Take this!" as I make a precision toss of my backpack into his chest arms from about 3 feet away. There were no other humans anywhere in between my friend and I. It was a perfectly safe and clean exchange. Possibly even less than 3 feet, as per his account, he wasn't even sure if the backpack went airborne. So that's what we did instead. And then did we do anything else? I tell myself to just keep taking the next step. I tell myself not to look back. Left, right, just keep walking. I make my way through the exit doors and finally someone decides to treat me like a human being. 2 young men acting as security guards for the Magic Hall exit ask if I'm okay. I say I'm not. They ask if there's anything they can do, a question I appreciated so very much. I calmly ask if there's anywhere where I might be able to break something. They give me a chuckle before saying, "Sorry, no." I say, "Fair enough." And keep skipping out. I pull myself together. I'm not the only one hurting here. Flushed and covered in tears, I march back into the Magic Hall. The security guards again ask me if I'm okay. I really appreciate them. I say no. I walk right back to the hall where I left Nicole. She is still there, still crying. I tap her. Yeah. So this is what we did instead. So what happens if someone in conversation with a judge yells, slams the table, gets up, throws their backpack, and then tells event security they aren't okay and want to break something? I do feel we have reached a much less nuanced and difficult part of the video at this point, right? You're going to get like kicked out of the venue, hopefully. Like there are a bunch of people like paying to play a Magic tournament there, and if you're acting like this, you shouldn't be there. That's kind of like the job of the event staff to like protect the integrity of the tournament, to get rid of you. And so the judge comes and talks to us. Did a judge talk to you about your disqualification? This is the first time that our account mentions a disqualification, for what it's worth. One more thing he says, you're kicked out of the Magic Hall. Okay. So that's what happened. And then after we got kicked out of the Magic Hall for this, we went online and wrote 5 emotional pages about the entire thing. Hi, I am going to attempt to remove names from this because I'm not actually trying to shame anyone in particular. This is trying to be a teaching moment. But yeah, I think I used Brad later. I'm Brad, name changed. And by now you may have heard that I had a really bad day too. Unimaginably bad, in fact. I won 2 matches of Magic and then left with a DQ and an expulsion from the Magic Hall. I do not regret my actions. You may have heard some rumors now, let me tell you my story. Yeah, I do not regret my actions. Like, there are maybe some actions that we've seen so far that we could regret a little bit, right? Maybe. So, anyway. So the context of this improperly determining a winner is a player got an unfortunate IDW match loss. It was avoidable a number of different ways, but not malicious. Judges consistently and professionally enforced the rule, even allowing the player to appeal twice and getting the head judge of DreamHack involved. The tournament was at DreamHack, an event with lots of different tournaments going on. Yeah, again, the prize pool was $130,000 plus, I believe, 64 invites to the Pro Tour. So, like, very large, important tournament. 3, the player escalated emotionally, reasonably presenting himself as threatening to the tournament and its players. Threatening or at least disruptive. Like, people could reasonably feel uncomfortable around a player acting in the way described by the player themselves. The judges then professionally ejected him from the venue. I don't think there was anything unprofessional about how the judges acted, even in the player's own account. And then 5, still upset and stating he didn't regret what he'd done, the player wrote a 5-page summary of the events and posted it to social media. So my thought, my expectation, if somebody did this, it's a little bit tricky to understand improperly determining a winner, sure, but like we can assume that the judges at the event who are working hard to make the Magic tournament run well, and like even the player himself says that 3 of them confirmed the ruling to like we can assume that they kind of like know what they're doing and like did the right thing, right? Like and then the players like writing this extremely emotional charged story about how this all happened and how like he lost all hope and his dreams were gone and the judges were making him feel like he wasn't human and stuff. Um, like I think ridiculing the player would not be completely unreasonable. Kind of mean, but social media can be mean. I think that like letting the player know, like, hey, like writing a big diatribe, being very critical of the event stuff is like pretty inappropriate and cruel to the event stuff, isn't it? Like they're trying their best, right? What's going on here? But I think that would be like a reasonable response. I think also just like letting it dwell in obscurity is pretty reasonable. Like just like, okay, you wrote a big thing. You're obviously steaming hot with emotions still. Uh, Whatever. Leave it alone. Um, this is what happened instead. Here's one response. I played Nicole 1 to 2 rounds later in this match's version of events that she shared with me. I don't even get the ruling. It's not like the OP and Nicole agreed Nicole wins if her top card is a land. The consequence of issuing no penalty is 0 harm done, so why penalize here? Just like, no, what's going on? Why would you do this? It doesn't make sense to me. Judges seem to have forgotten their purpose to make the game enjoyable and fair. This isn't fair and should be an easy judgment call using common sense. Which is an like interesting idea. I don't think competitive rules for games, generally speaking, you follow the competitive rules of what you're competing for, not common sense, right? Like the balk rule in baseball is not decided by common sense. It's decided by like the 3 people in the world who understand how it even works or something like that. Like there's some like control room somewhere in like Nevada probably where the 3 people who understand what balking is sit and watch all the baseball games and then press a button when it happens. I don't think common sense is relevant, but okay. 162 likes. The ruling was absolutely dog water, and every judge involved should be named, shamed, and not permitted to judge a competitive level event ever again. That said, you deserve the DQ for your behavior in the aftermath. You did not govern your emotions as an adult should. I think that like one of those paragraphs is right, and the other one, like what? Again, like this is the text of the rule. It's just the text isn't that long, and not actually like that complicated. Magic judges are inhuman losers. 29 likes on that one. Oh wow, the situation was far worse than I imagined. I assumed there was some benefit towards looking at the top card, like turns. This is just ridiculous. Rules always need some discretion and good judges use it. That ruling is disheartening, and then the rest is disturbing. 128 likes on this one. I was browsing cards and I heard your exchange with the last judge when you said, "Please don't tell me you understand again." You were incredibly polite and respectful. It's ridiculous you were asked to leave. 73 likes on that one. I just want to, like, again, I slam my fist on the table directly in front of myself and intensely shout something to the effect of, "This is absurd." I tell the security guards I'm not okay, ask if there's somewhere I could break something. Yeah. I don't know. I think you know, the document provided explains very simply that it wasn't ridiculous for this person to be asked to leave. That's awful. Didn't know it was you and Nicole. Not sure if there's anything to say to make the hurt go away, but judges were wrong to be fishing for a reason to give you losses. 38 likes on that one. The judges were not. They're like there to enforce the rules of the tournament, right? Becomes her turn, she draws and conceded. It's the same thing. Terrible judging. 76 likes on that one. It is true that if they played the game by the rules of Magic, likely the same thing would have happened, but we already like talked like they didn't. They broke the rules of Magic and used them to determine the outcome. It is a weird rule. It does seem unfair. Um, Reading this actually made me angry. The lack of an ounce of compassion from those judges is, for lack of a better word, pathetic. I'm actually pissed off reading that outcome. I understand. No, you don't, Judge. It's abundantly clear that you haven't had a human moment in your life. 23 likes on that one. Very easy solution here. All of these judges should be disbarred, and you should get an invite. Um, for what it's worth, like this wasn't like a match where if Brad is the name I'm using for this player. If Brad won, um, Brad was going to be invited to the Pro Tour. This was a match where if Brad won and then won 3 more times in a row without losing or drawing, he would have been invited to the Pro Tour. So, bit much. Just for fun again. This is going back in spirit to this first example where we were talking about some fun magic theory, just looking at lands and stuff. A lot of people in response to this were talking about how like the situation's already over, like why does this even matter? Our opponent's obviously just conceding, who cares? Like it's already done, etc., etc. But the game board was that with our opponent on 20 health, which is a long way away from the game being over. And in the same way that we talked about like how just playing one land over another can actually make a fairly significant difference in a game of Magic. And you know, who wins and loses a competitive game of Magic is somewhat of a big deal when there's this much of a prize pool on the line. I think it's interesting to like observe like that, yeah, there are actually reasons why on turn 3 it isn't legal for your opponent to just like look at their top card and say whether it's a land or not. Which to me, as someone who like, for me playing Magic is a lot about like the integrity of playing a game of Magic. Like I want to play a game of Magic when I play a game of Magic, in the same way that if I play a game of baseball, I might want to play a game of baseball. For me, it's like obvious that if people get to just look at the top card of their library when they shouldn't be allowed to on turn 3, that can change a lot of things about the game, and probably we shouldn't be doing that in serious Magic tournaments. This can absolutely change what happens for somebody to do this. Our opponent was still at 20 health, and we only had 3 power of creatures in play when this happened. Our opponent has lots of cards like Go for the Throat, which can kill our creatures. It only costs 2 mana, Go for the Throat, so if they draw 1 more land, they can play that. We only have 2 creatures in play. One of them has 1 power by default. So if we know they can't cast Go for the Throat, we can buff 1 creature for a quick kill. But if we don't know that, we have to play a lot more cautiously. Our deck plays a lot of things that buff creatures. So like we could cast Monstrous Rage. Target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Create a monster roll token attached to it. And then we could play twice the Rage on Two-Headed Hunter. Target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Double strike means it attacks twice. And Questing Druid, whenever you cast a spell that's white, blue, black, or red, put a +1/+1 counter on Questing Druid. Questing Druid's already 2/2 in like the base state, and we could play Monstrous Rage on it now. It would become a 5/3. And the next turn we could play Two-Headed Hunter, and it would be a 6/4 from us playing a red card, and then it would get double strike and deal 12 damage. That would kill our opponent really quick, and, you know, this line would make it pretty appealing to put Monstrous Rage on our Questing Druid right now. But if our opponent can draw and Go for the Throat, they can kill Questing Druid, and we'll lose the Monstrous Rage as well, and that seems worse. So that can change our play in a way which can benefit us. For what it's worth, like, this doesn't have to benefit us. It just has to change the game of Magic to be illegal. Yeah, you just like shouldn't do things which are outside the rules of a game of Magic while you're resolving a game of Magic in a tournament for $100,000+ and 64 invites to the Pro Tour. It is, you know, somewhat important that you play the games of Magic by the rules of Magic. At least to some people. Um, Here's a sample angle shoot from our opponent. If it's allowed for our opponent to do this, are there things that our opponent could do? We'll remember how small bits of information can warp how people play out games of Magic. What if our opponent wants us to worry about go for the throat? Like they don't want us to stack up one creature with tons of multiplicative power to kill us as quickly as possible. They want us to think they could play go for the throat next turn. This could be a way for them to kind of like get in our heads, like, hey, by the way, I have go for the throat in my deck. I can play it next turn. It would be really, unfortunate if you put Monstrous Rage on your Questing Druid, because I could just go for the throat it. So put Monstrous Rage on your smaller creature, and then doubling that creature's damage won't deal me as much damage. And maybe our opponent is actually trying to draw toward Path of Peril, which can destroy all creatures but costs 3. All of our creatures, at least. All creatures with mana value 2 or less, which is all of the creatures that we're talking about at the moment. That would be a way that our opponent could angle shoot, doing this and try to get an advantage by giving us a little bit of information in a way that was favorable to them. So, I am not saying that the players were thinking these things or intending these things. What I'm like pointing out in response to an overwhelming number of people on social media saying that like this is ludicrous and there's no reason why this should ever matter, etc., 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 is like, of course it matters at competitive level Magic the Gathering tournaments that people don't like just do things that are outside the rules of the game that could very reasonably change what happened in the game. For all the problems with false positives and everything, you do have to make a rule that can be enforced. You do have to like have a rule that people can enforce, and this is the rule that we have. And like maybe there's some argument for leniency here and downgrading the penalty or something like that. That didn't happen. Maybe that's bad, maybe that's too bad. Or maybe the people running the game told the judges that they had to do this, and that's how it is. I don't know, but like yelling at the judges and saying they've never experienced a human emotion and shit is like wild. What the fuck? Okay. In game states where hidden information can change player decisions at tournaments for $130,000, should players be allowed to agree to break the rules together? I think no. I think that seems like a nightmare for tournament integrity. What are we meant to do if players start doing things like this deliberately to try to gain advantages against unwitting opponents? And also, given that the rules of the tournament are published, the rules enforcement level of the tournament is stated to be very high, the prize pool is recognizably large, it doesn't seem like a grave tragedy to me to give a player a match loss for telling their opponent it's okay for them to break the rules in a way which commits an infraction meant to be penalized with match loss. I just don't think that that's a ludicrous tragedy or anything. I'm not riled up about that. So, when I saw this post and I saw the responses to it and I saw how emotional the post was, and I rechecked the Magic the Gathering rules and confirmed that like really this is fairly straightforwardly stated in the Magic the Gathering rules. And also I like placed myself in the player's shoes and was like, if my opponent asked if they could break the rules of the game in a like essentially max rules enforcement level tournament, while I was playing against them, would I say yes? And I was like, no. Of course not. One thing that I wanted to talk about was emotional manipulation, because I think that a lot of people are like emotionally roused by this story and responding emotionally to it. And something that struck me in particular reading the document was how emotionally manipulative it was. And so I wanted to go through some of the ways that the narrator misconstrued or exaggerated events and emotions and recognize just that they had done that, basically. The document was extremely effective in making many people side with the author and feel sympathy for the author and anger at the judges involved in the event. And I was hoping this might make some people like examine their stance a little bit more critically, or even think more critically about these sorts of communications in the future. I am not trying to say that the person who did this is a bad human being. Um, my like loose hypothesis is that they are a quite intelligent human being who has been very emotional about this, and they're also like a strategy gamer. And this is a patternistic thing that I've seen among strategy gamers. And so if you're someone who cares about strategy gamers, I think it's a useful thing for you to learn and see if you can see in other strategy gamers yourself. Um, is that strategy gamers learn how to leverage every possible resource toward achieving their goals. Like someone who gets really good at magic knows how to try to win with every magic card that they have on their deck, and every action that they play can be about trying to win. And you can, you know, me too here, right? Like I started this by talking about how if you have 3 different lands in your hand, you can think really deeply about which way to play them, and argued that sometimes it was right to deal yourself 2 damage for ostensibly no reason, because actually there are deep things going on in the game which give you an advantage sometimes if you do that. So like, yeah. um and especially I've found when strategy gamers have little respect for rules, this can include pushing rules and cultural norms pretty hard to try to win. A huge problem that I've run into with strategy gamers in my life is when I'm trying to like play a game of Magic with them, and I care about winning the game of Magic within the rules of the game of Magic, and they are trying to win a game of Magic against me. And they care about using everything available to them to their advantage to win the game of Magic against me. But they don't care as much about playing the game of Magic. They care about winning. And so they're going to do things like try to bend rules and, push things outside of the game that we're actually playing together to try to get an advantage. That can be really frustrating. And, sometimes people do that. Strategy gamers have permission to try their hardest to win at something within some set parameters. There are some boundaries around it. Like you're playing a game. It's okay right now for you to try your hardest to win. But in the rest of life, you do not have those parameters set. You do not have permission to like be talking to someone and try your hardest to get something from them. That's manipulative and gross, and like if you do that, they very well may never want to talk to you again. And sometimes when strategy gamers relate narratives, they try to use every sentence to further push the conclusion they're trying to present, sometimes to the point of obscuring the truth, lying, dehumanizing, or otherwise failing to have empathy for other people, etc. Like this all kind of ties into it. Strategy gamers, yeah, if they're not displaying empathy for other people, if they're not displaying respect for other people, there's very little reason to think that they are going to err away from describing reality in a way that favors them as much as possible, drives them toward the result that they want as much as possible, and has little to no regard for the other people that they're talking about. Yeah, and I think this person's a strategy gamer. And I think a good number of you watching are also strategy gamers, and this is maybe something that would be good for you to have in your head to think about too. All right. Hi, I'm Brad. I changed Brad's name. I also changed Brad's opponent's name to Jessica. In the tweets, it was left as Nicole. Whoops. I'm not going to go back and fix that now. Hi, I'm Brad, and by now you may have heard that I had a really bad day too. Unimaginably bad, in fact. So I have some notes here. Unimaginably bad, this is exaggerated editorialization. Losing a match of Magic isn't that big a deal. We're starting strong. We have already established that we're like emotionally exaggerating what's going on, and an attentive reader will already be like, oh, you're not giving me a like level-headed, accurate portrayal of what the events were. I won 2 matches of Magic and then left with a disqualification and an expulsion from the Magic Hall. I do not regret my actions. Exclamation mark. Again. like red flag number 2 in this document, right? Like this person has just said that they got disqualified and expelled from the Magic Hall and they don't regret anything that they do. Red flags all over the place. You may have heard some rumors by now. Let me tell you my story. I started out the RC rather cold at 1 and 2. Regional Championship, I believe is what RC stands for. But managed to win 5 of my last 6 to sneak into day 2 at 6 and 3, but with a little bit of momentum. I handily beat my first opponent of the day, hang out for an hour waiting for the next round to start, and get some exciting news. I've been matched with Jessica Famous Person. That's the name I picked. Uh, I had never met Jessica, but I don't live under a rock, and so I had certainly heard of her. I was curious to see what she was like and better understand why and how the magic world had fallen in love with her so quickly. This is like kind of a subplot here, but I wanted to like note that we're immediately building affection for Jessica. Apparently the magic world has fallen in love with her. I don't know if I'm gonna like comment super much on that stuff, but I have tagged it to point it out so you can think about it yourself. Anyway, I was also excited because Legends is a great matchup for questing red, which is the deck we're playing, but that's less important for the story. First things first, Jessica is as kind as they say she is, if not more so. We had a friendly, fair, and competitive match. So 2 notes on this. One, this is a person that Brad has played 1 match of Magic with in his life. It's like quite a lot to make authoritative character judgments of another person based on 1 match of Magic with them. And we're saying nice things about Jessica here, but you know, we're presenting ourselves as like judges of people's character based on playing 1 match of Magic with them, which isn't super reasonable. But then number 2 thing that I want to know, we had a friendly, fair, and competitive match. The entire thing here in question is like the match wasn't fair, right? We got a match loss and then eventually because of our actions it was upgraded to us being disqualified from the tournament. So like we haven't proven that the match was fair, and in fact the 3 different judges agreed that it wasn't and was worth giving us and Jessica each match losses. So, you know, just noting that that word got put in there, that's an opinion which is not supported by the facts. It was incredibly refreshing for the high stress X3 bracket of day 2. We carried bits of friendly conversation throughout our games and sideboarding. She deserves all the love she gets from the Magic World and more. We've talked about Jessica receiving love twice now. We finished our match after Jessica conceded game 3, and we continued our friendly conversation for a few more minutes before everything imploded. A judge sits down. Everything from here on out is to the best of my recollection, and that of those who were around during the intense emotional events that are about to unfold. I will be telling you the full honest truth. I'll say now that while I stand by my statement that I have no regrets, I will of course concede that not everything I did was perfect. But you see, that's the thing about humans. We simply aren't perfect. I think this is a really interesting, like, convoluted distancing from ownership of actions. We've just, like, made everything very muddy with this. We said I have no regrets at the start, but then also now we're saying we will concede not everything that we did was perfect, which is like a very, very, very soft way to admit that some of our behavior was maybe pretty bad. But then we immediately deny ownership of that, right? That's the thing about humans. We simply aren't perfect. So we're not taking ownership of our bad actions. We're just saying that humans are shitty. So we're not really like taking any blame here whatsoever for what we've done. Anyway, I did my best in an impossible situation, and many expressed to me that they think they'd have done far worse. This is like an exaggerated nothing statement. This is not an impossible situation. For starters, it's like a fairly standard situation covered by the rules of Magic the Gathering. And many expressed to me that they think they'd have done far worse. Like I read as people are being nice to you, and to Brad's credit, Brad seems to have lots of friends, and I'm sure he is generally like a sociable guy who gets along with lots of people. He seems very emotionally faceted, is maybe the word I want to say. Um, he's very capable of using emotion in what he's writing here in order to construct the narrative that he wants, which implies that he has some level of emotional intelligence, which probably, like, it seems like, sure, like, yeah, lots of friends, sure. I'm not trying to psychoanalyze this, like, super much. I don't know, Brad. I am responding to this document, which fits into a multiple decade experience of me interacting with emotionally manipulative strategy gamers, and we see it again, you know? I wouldn't expect anyone else to hold back everything for every moment as their dreams crumble away, and so I don't regret not being able to do so. So this is emotional overattachment to winning at Magic the Gathering. Their dreams crumble away. Like sure, it's like fine to want to win at Magic and to aspire to be on the Pro Tour and stuff. That's cool. That is Wizards' marketing strategy, etc., etc., etc. But attaching a level of importance to Magic such that getting a match loss at a Magic tournament feels like your dreams crumbling away, and you wouldn't expect anyone else to hold back everything for every moment in such a situation, which is a weird way to say, like, he had extremely negative outbursts and acted badly. Is a bit much, right? And if someone's dream is to do well at Magic, can we trust them to behave well when their own actions cause them to not do well at Magic? Is a question that I have. Anyway, we all deserve to be treated as humans and to be allowed to act like humans. Now back to the story. This is a mode of bullshit trying to frame terrible behavior which got him ejected from the tournament as okay, as human. He's instead of saying I did shitty stuff and got ejected from the tournament, he's saying I am a human. Humans do shitty stuff all the time. That's okay. Which, yeah, is like not very mature. Let's rewind a bit before the judge sits down. Jessica wins a close game 1 before I even the score in game 2 and take us to game 3. Jessica plays Otawara, that's blue land, and passes. As far as I remember at this moment, there isn't a single card in her deck that can be cast for a single blue mana, so I find this a bit odd. I'm gonna flag that. This is information that our opponent, or that we, Brad, are gathering from land drop order. And remember, I was like talking about how like small things in land drop order can influence how you think about things and maybe change your plays going forward. So Brad's demonstrating that he's like aware or at least picking up on information about land drop order, like probably implying that he gets that that stuff is important. Probably implying that like he has a nuanced understanding about how small factors can influence how a game of Magic plays out. Which is maybe worth coming back to later. I don't know. Anyway, I play a land and pass. Jessica draws her card and passes. My eyes go wide. She weakly shrugs and states that Girk doesn't go below 6. So Jessica drew her card and passes. She didn't play a land, so she missed her land drop, which means she has no lands, which means it's going to be really hard for her to cast any of her spells. I draw a card, hardcast, questing druid, and pass. We now have a 1/1 on the board. Jessica wisps again. I untap, draw a Swift Spear, play a land, cast the Swift Spear, triggering druid. We now have a 1/2 and a 2/2 on the board. And I begin pulling another spell out of my hand when Jessica sees the writing on the wall. So we have a 1/2 and a 2/2 on the board. Our opponent's at 20. We have 3 power. And Jessica is seeing the writing on the wall. Which, okay. We didn't win yet, for what it's worth. Also, we don't think that we won yet. Yeah. I can't believe how close I am to continuing my PT Dream One. We don't think that we already did. But yeah, okay, whatever. My hand is much more aggressive than my opening sequence implied, and the board state and damage I'm presenting is already all but game ending. Again, the opponent is on 20 life. We have 3 power in play. Um, I mean, note that nowhere in describing this game situation does Brad say, like, I haven't dealt any damage to Jessica yet. I have 2 creatures in play. I am going to deal 6 damage. 7 damage? 7 damage this turn. Which is good. For what it's worth, Brad is, like, obviously massively favored in the game, but something to keep an eye on here with someone who's, like, emotionally presenting a narrative, trying to get results that he wants, is he is, like, presenting a story here about what's happening that you don't have to agree with. She says something to me along the lines of, can I look at my top card? If it's not a land, I'm just going to scoop. So this is a request to improperly determine the winner of the match, the controversial rule that we are talking about, of course. And consider, though, that even without it being that, it's a request to do something that players aren't allowed to do in games of Magic. And it's being made in a $130,000 prize pool tournament at max rule enforcement level. And I mean, I think a sensible default would be to say no to these kinds of requests. And that really doesn't have to be impolite or anything. It can just be like, just wait a sec. I am going to finish my turn in like 10 seconds. But, like, you know, if you want to be really polite to your opponent in a situation like this, like, play quickly. It seems like a way to do it. Anyway, my brain breaks. I can't believe how close I am to continuing my PT dream run. I can't believe I'm going to beat Jessica Tipple. And I have no... I did a very bad job of changing names. I'm sorry. Jessica, famous person. And I have no idea how to respond. Being in the X3 bracket sucks. Mulliganing hard sucks. Missing land drops sucks. Getting beaten down by your opponent sucks. I don't know. Those are all claims. I kind of feel like some of that stuff's kind of fine. Anyway, after at least 10 seconds of my brain being broken, I decide that rather than tell this incredibly kind young woman that beatings will continue until morale improves, I'll just let her look. So, again, notice how we've detached ourselves from the blame for what's happened, like from the agency of our action. So there are plenty of ways to kindly tell your opponent not to break the rules of Magic in concluding your game. You can just be like, hey, wait a second. You can, you know, I'm gonna finish my turn in like 10 seconds here, and then you can look. That is kind. But yeah, we're like framing our opponent as this kind young woman who we have to be nice to, which again, like, sometimes some of that stuff gets a little bit creepy here, I think. And completely not claiming ownership for what we're doing. Yeah, okay. Who cares? She has no available game actions. I'm just sitting here doing aggro things, dumping my hand. I don't really need to shove this play with fire in her face, scry, and attack before letting her end this game that is every Magic player's Game 3 nightmare. So this is a direct statement that the player doesn't think the rules of Magic should apply to him or his opponent he's friendly with in a max rules enforcement level tournament. Who cares? Like the judges? Some people want you to play the game like by the rules. Maybe, I don't know. I remember giving an unenthusiastic shrug and an unenthusiastic verbal response of some kind. I genuinely cannot tell you the words that came out of my mouth. No idea. A friend tells me I said, sure, whatever. So I guess we'll go with that. Jessica quickly peeks and then scoops up her cards. We share a friendly conversation as we're packing up. I apologize for bad luck. She understands it's part of the game. We chat. All good things. This stuff is like fairly inoffensive, I think. I don't know. Remember when I said who cares? Yeah, someone cared. I love the presentation of that, like it's a surprise. Like, why wouldn't people care when you're playing in a Magic tournament for over $100,000 prize pool if you tell your opponent you don't care if they break the rules of Magic? Anyway, a few minutes later, a judge sits down and asks us a question. Not sure the exact words, but something to the effect of asking us if we knew what we had just done was wrong. This is professional protocol for IDW, as if players realize it's wrong, the penalty is upgraded to immediate disqualification. So this is just the judge being professional. This is the first thing to do in the process of giving penalties for IDW. Jessica and I are both confused. The judge states she saw and heard the end of our match and that Jessica's proposition, my allowance of it, was an IDW. We both physically sync. After the judge confirms with each of us that we had no idea of this and that we had no ill intentions, she states that we'll both be getting a match loss. The walls close in. I drop my glasses and begin to shake. I don't know exactly when tears started streaming down Jessica's face, but I assume it was right around now. We both plead. I've been fighting through the loser's bracket and X4 is dead with my breakers. I'm effectively DQ'd from PT contention. The judge says I'm not DQ'd. He is very literally not DQ'd. Anyway. The judge says I'm not out of PT contention. Also true, you're still in a tournament where the top 64 can get on the Pro Tour. For what it's worth, like a third of people who ended the tournament 10-4 actually did qualify for the Pro Tour. I took a look. But like also just in general, if you're not disqualified from the tournament yet, like it is plausible that you could qualify somehow. We are largely out of the running for the Pro Tour at this point. That is true. We are overstating how true that is, and also it doesn't really matter because we did something that carries a match loss penalty, and now we got a match loss for it, and how is whether we're in the running for the Pro Tour or not any more relevant to that? I don't know. Why was that the judge's problem? Why is that the judge's problem? Anyway, the judge says she understands. The judge does not understand. That's really disrespectful of the judge. Jessica pleads. She didn't mean to. She had no idea. She'll talk to anyone. I won the match. It was over. I plead. It can't end like this. The PT is on the line. I wanted to note here that Brad makes the game feel very high stakes, and it's believable that it was very high stakes to him. But it's maybe worth noting that he also thinks that he has to win 3 more matches in a row to actually make the Pro Tour, which isn't like a thing that's in any stretch of the Imagine guaranteed to happen. And he mentions that later. And also in the last paragraph, he said he didn't think anyone would care if he and Jessica played by the rules or not in it. This is a match with the Pro Tour on the line, and you're just thinking like, oh yeah, sure, like do things that are outside the rules of Magic. That's fine. Who would care? Boom, next paragraph. The Pro Tour is on the line. Like, there's this incredible double standard. There's a double evaluation of like everything that goes on in this, where the stuff that he does wrong is like human and it just doesn't matter that much. But then the stakes for him, the things that happen to him are like the end of the world. The stakes are so high. Everything's awful. Other people are awful. They don't feel empathy for him, etc. And if you pay attention to it, you see that like over and over again in this document. Anyway, the PT is on the line, and I have a commanding position that my opponent didn't think they could come back from. We ask for an appeal. She says no, and that she's the head judge. We beg for an appeal. She says she'll go talk to someone. So the head judge of the event told them, like, no, I'm the head judge. This is an IDW. You can't like appeal to anyone. I'm the head judge. But then like they kept pushing, and the judge accommodated. Is what just happened there. I don't know if we give the judge kudos for that or not. Maybe it's better for a judge to be like, no, like my ruling stands, which seems like that's allowed. Like you're a judge, you're allowed to judge, right? But I don't know. We have a judge accommodating to Brad here. She consults with another judge, maybe 5 to 6 feet behind me. They're discussing my fate just out of earshot. It's torture. This is so over the top. Jessica's in tears. I am in shock. Jessica is apologetic. I do not blame her. I know she didn't mean to. Gross. You did it. So more appropriate, I do not blame her. My decision to agree to IDW was my fault. I told her she could break the rules. I know she didn't mean to. Oh. After what felt like centuries and seconds all at once, the judge comes back alone and confirms, yes, match loss. This is the first instance of another judge agreeing with the ruling. I feel the tears coming. Ask where the other judge went. I ask why we aren't hearing anything from him. This is the second instance of not accepting what the judge says. I'm sure Jessica said something as well, but I have no earthly idea if she did or what she may have said. The panic is sinking in. I won a fair match of magic. Again, from the perspective of the rules of magic, it wasn't a fair match of magic, which is why this is happening, right? No one at the table, including the judge, contested this statement, only countering by continuing to insist the words we exchanged in Jessica's piece and scoop were grounds for match loss or worse for both of us. I read this personally as like the judge. Why does the judge have to argue with you about that? They're just enforcing an IDW. Like they don't have to like prove to you in particular that your match of magic wasn't played fairly. They just have to explain what the IDW penalty is and give it to you. That's what. Anyway, the first judge brings over the second judge. He says nothing new. Some soup of words, including IDW and I understand as I plead for my tournament life. Here we're continuing to disagree with judges who are continuing to agree with each other that this is the correct ruling. We're continuing also to be catered to by judges. Like they asked what was going on with the second judge, why wasn't he here telling them, and the first judge went and got the second judge for them. He is now here explaining to Brad, and Brad is describing his attempts as some soup of words, and I understand in quotations that's meant derogatorily, like negatively. That'll be explained later, but yeah. We try to appeal again. Isn't there anyone? Please, someone must actually hear us. We had a fair, friendly, competitive match. Again, that isn't true. For like the third time. He said it 3 times. Fair match of magic. We had a friendly, fair, and competitive match. Fair match of magic. Where were we? Fair, friendly, competitive match. It just still isn't true. It is not true. The ending wasn't 100% by the book. Yeah! That's the problem. But the outcome of the game was not altered or bartered in any way. Okay, but this is a person who knows that like seeing somebody play a mono blue untapped land on turn 1 says important things about how the game's playing out. Remember that? Does he really think that like letting her look at her top card on turn 3 doesn't change anything? Like really? Are you sure? He hadn't played his card yet on turn 3. He doesn't think that like finding that information out could have some relevance to how he plays? I don't know. I think that's bullshit. Anyway. This can't possibly be how we want to disqualify a player from PT contention. So 1, he's not being disqualified. Again, he's receiving a match loss. How we want. This can't possibly be how we want. He's like so extremely dismissive of the idea that the judges have been taught the rules of the tournament and their job is to enforce it, right? Like, what does he have to do with how Wizards and the judges that are running their events want to disqualify players from PT contention? They say they will get the DreamHack head judge. This is another instance of the judges accommodating to Brad. A smidge of hope, a new person, a chance for help. The judge sits down. More claims of understanding, but no listening. He's saying the same words as the other judges and explaining why this is what we deserve. I ask him directly if there's any chance to overturn this ruling or if he's just here to continue to explain it to us. He confirms there's no chance. So this is just another instance of a judge agreeing with the ruling, also catering to Brad. Like, the event staff here are working so hard. They're being like so professional. they're telling him that they understand what he's saying because presumably they've been trained in how to de-escalate, and that is a technique that they were taught. I don't know. Um, yeah, you know how like when you look at how someone treats a waiter when you go to a restaurant with them, it says a huge amount about their character. Like this document should be sending up like millions of different red flags for you in that sort of area of like this is a person you are interfacing with like professionally ish. They're at their job. Um, they have like different knowledge and responsibilities and permissions from you in the situation that you are in, and like you should treat them with respect. Yeah. Anyway, it's over. No PT, no epic run, no more fire, no more hope. Point blank. You won, but you're done anyway, kid. Should have continued the beating. Shouldn't have been so human there. Again, we are equivocating, accusing to break the rules of the tournament. He's competing in with being human. You don't have to. You can be a human and not do that. Your opponent was suffering, but that's not your problem. I lost. I am lost. I actually tagged that one because I like the construction. I think it's like a lot of this document is like massively emotionally over the top, and this is also pretty emotionally over the top, but also it's kind of a beautiful statement of a strategy gamer, and I feel like I can read that as being very true here. He did lose, um, and he does seem to be lost. It's at this point that I finally allow my emotions to overtake me. So far, I've been firm but fair while holding back tears. But this tournament that I gave everything for, like when I read someone say that they gave everything for something, I like think of soldiers dying in a war. So I just like kind of flagged that. We're just really hyping up a lot of things. There are no concrete details here. Like I like prepared for this tournament for 100 hours or something like that, right? Anyway, Um, this tournament that I gave everything for is now over for me, and none of them care. Every moment with the judges has been cold and calculated. I would just call that professional. Every I understand has echoed with emptiness. I slam my fist on the table directly in front of myself, intensely shout something to the effect of "This is absurd," and get out of there as efficiently as possible. This is escalation. It is escalation in a threatening way. What happened here is the penalty got upgraded, or I think a different penalty was given for unsportsmanlike conduct major or something like that. Um, which is basically like you were acting in a way that is threatening to the other people of the event and carries a DQ and removal from the tournament. So that's what we have just entered the start of. And actually, like reading through the rules for implementing unsportsmanlike conduct major, one of the flags in it is if people are repentant and saying like, okay, I get it that what I did was wrong, even if they had an outburst, if they're repentant about it, you can be like, okay, maybe we can calm down and don't have to enforce this. But it says like pretty specifically, if they say things like "this is ridiculous," that's a red flag. So he's actually quoted himself as doing something written as a thing to watch out for the penalty that he receives next. I did not shout at anyone. I did not shout in anyone's face. My face followed my fist as I shouted into the abyss. This is like a lot. I pick up my backpack and I'm gone. A few steps down the center hallway and I lock eyes with one of my friends and sternly state, "Take this," as I make a precision toss of my backpack into his chest arms from about 3 feet away. There were no other humans anywhere in between my friend and I. It was a perfectly safe and clean exchange, possibly even less than 3 feet. As per his account, he wasn't even sure if the backpack went airborne. Notice how when the judges are cold and calculated, it's very negative. They're like not human. When he is like emotional, a lot of the time he's like, but it's okay for me to be emotional. Everyone should be allowed to be human, etc., etc., etc. But then when we get to like when we get to an element of the story where like this was a concrete detail that led to the penalty that you received, um, all of a sudden we're using like um, engineering language to describe what happened. There is no longer like, in a rage, I flung my backpack. Like, remember, he just said, my face followed my fist as I shouted into the abyss. He said, it's over. No PT, no epic run, no more fire, no more hope. And then when he throws a backpack, he says, I make a precision toss of my backpack into his chest arms from about 3 feet away. There were no other humans anywhere in between my friend and I. It was a perfectly safe and clean exchange, possibly even less than 3 feet. As per his account, he wasn't even sure if the backpack went airborne. This is like really manipulative. Where he thinks it evokes sympathy for him to describe himself as emotional and tormented and lost and hurt and out of control, he does so. But whenever there's like a concrete detail that is like, well, if you're acting irrationally and emotionally in this moment, that justifies the penalty that you got that you're so upset about, he's like, oh, by the way, I was so calm in this moment. For these 2 seconds, surrounded by everything else that I was so upset during, I was extremely precise and calm and non-threatening. Which is just like, it's so manipulative. I tell myself to keep taking the next step. I tell myself not to look back. Left, right, just keep walking. I make my way through the exit doors, and finally someone decides to treat me like a human being. Question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. Like, when has anybody not been treating him like a human being? Anyway, the 2 young men acting as security guards for the magic hall exit ask if I'm okay, and I say I'm not. This is escalation and threatening way number 2. I would argue that if somebody at an event tells security that they're not okay, and then if they ask if there's anything they can do, a question that he appreciated so very much, and he says, he calmly asks if there's anywhere he might be able to break something. I would argue that if somebody at an event goes to security, says they're not okay, and they're looking for something to break, that like, if they don't get kicked out of the venue, what is security there for? But like, I don't know, like logic and the idea that the things that he does have consequences and that the people he's interacting with have their own motivations and jobs just like isn't here, right? Yeah, anyway. They give me a chuckle before saying sorry. No. I say fair enough and keep walking. I sit and hide behind a giant Tremax sign. I begin to cry, then I begin to sob. The waves crash over me. I worked intensely and tirelessly to build a meta-breaking deck, and I was sure I had done it. We would later find out that I was right when Adam would go on to win the RC with my deck. I had so much momentum after notching my 4th victory in a row, let alone managing to beat a rising star PT competitor. Here we're like editorializing Jessica again, right? In a matter of moments, I fell from the top of the world to the bottom of the ocean because when my brilliantly kind opponent asked for a reprieve, I allowed it. My brilliantly kind opponent. My brilliantly kind opponent. Yeah, I found that a little like creepy, right? At points, the idealization of Jessica bit's a bit weird, and when wondering why it's in this document, the answers, which suggest themselves, are a bit uncomfortable. I pull myself together. I am not the only one hurting here. Flushed and covered in tears, I am marched back into the magic hall. The security guards again ask me if I'm okay. I really appreciate them. I say no. Escalation and threatening way number 4. You shouldn't keep telling the security guards that you're not okay if you want to stay in the venue that there's security for. I walk right back to the hall where I left Jessica. She is still there, still crying. I tap her on the shoulder and gesture for a hug. I am too emotional to use my words. She immediately gets up. We hug, we cry. I think she apologized again, and I accepted her apology again. Emotions are too high, but I know that we hugged and cried together. I know that I left her on a good note because multiple folks I do not know reached out to me on Twitter saying things like I was a class act to come back to Jessica and that I displayed tremendous sportsmanship. I can understand how someone who only heard me shout would disagree. I can understand why someone who read rumors on Reddit would disagree. But these are accounts shared with me by complete strangers who were actually there. I did not know that this would be the last time I would get a chance to talk to Jessica, but I am very thankful that she was the first person I sought out after returning to the hall. We needed to share that moment. I needed her to know that I held nothing but appreciation for her and our match. We hugged. We cried. I still find this, like, Brooch's weirdness a bit. I don't know. Anyway, I am broken in pieces. I don't know where I am or where to go. I see one of my best friends and all. I just like. Brad has never met Jessica before today. They're not like good friends. I don't know. Maybe we're witnessing some trauma bonding or something. I don't know. I'm broken in pieces. I don't know where I am or where to go. I see one of my best friends and all but collapse in his arms. I am sobbing. I can't even write this right now without tears streaming down my face. I don't know how long he held me. I don't know how long I sobbed. I know he wasn't altogether sure what had happened, but he was there for me. He cried with me. I think crying is awesome. Like, crying is great, and the nice thing about this document is it normalizes men openly sharing sadness. I think that that's great. That's a problem with masculinity that good to see that we're improving on that. However, this is a venue for a $130,000 like serious competitive tournament, and like presumably there are people around them like trying to play games or something. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe they're off in a side area. But like in general, like this may be further disruptive to the tournament. It's like a half point. It's a half point. Eventually the tears stopped. I found my feet and I asked my friends to help me get some space from the crowd. We step aside. I try to catch my breath, and now a fourth judge approaches. He hands me my playmat. It appears I left it behind. I thank him. He asks if we can talk. I hope you can understand why I was apprehensive, but I agree. I found my feet again. I am honest, firm, but fair. And for the very first time, a judge treats me like a human. That is so unfair to the judges. He asks for details about the situation, about what I did, about what Jessica did, about why I did what I did. The only judge that didn't feed me the I understand line was the only one to, in fact, understand me. I wish he had been there during the time that the ruling was made. I think things may have turned out differently. So I want to like, my understanding of how this works for judges is like, I think a judge who wasn't involved in the incident is getting a debrief so that they can like write up what happened, and they want a person not involved to get information to make sure that like stories are matching and everything. That's I think why this happened, but I don't know exactly. Like maybe it's something else. I guess. But I do just want to note that 3 judges all said that the ruling was correct, and then Brad talked to 1 judge who didn't have to reinforce to him that the ruling was correct because it's already been made, right? And that judge didn't say that the ruling was wrong. He just asked for Brad's recollection of the details of the story. And that's enough here for Brad to like suddenly say that the judge is treating him like a human, and that he wishes he had been there during the time that the ruling was made and thinks things may have turned out differently. Which, like, the judge didn't say that. The judge didn't say that it wasn't an IDW. The fact that he's implying that from this interaction suggests again that he's not respecting the judges or agreeing that they made the decision, like enforced the rules, which is weird and really disrespectful to the judges. Yeah. So anyway, I thank them very much for our conversation. Another person I'm glad I left on a very good note, because this is another person I did not know it would be my last chance to talk to. I returned to a few of my friends. The rest are talking to judges and TOs trying to advocate for me. That's so disruptive. It's, I mean, okay. I would feel so uncomfortable. Like, I am just a very different person from Brad. I would not have escalated at all at any point in here, and like we are now getting to levels of escalation where I actually like feel secondary cringe, which I didn't feel before. Before I was like, you're really upset I want to drill into that and look at how that's affecting what you're saying and how it's like hurting people around this situation. But like at this point, the idea of a bunch of other people also bugging the judges who are just like doing their job, like actually kind of like I reach a point where I cringe a bit personally. After my conversation with, in italics, the good judge, I feel just the tiniest bit better. A moment later, the third judge approaches me. The judge who directly stated that the ruling was final and would not be reconsidered at all. The judge who broke the camel's back. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think the first and second judges already also decided that for what it's worth. His opener is to ask if the fourth judge talked to me about my disqualification. This is the first time disqualifications mentioned in the document. I'm not sure if Brad thought that he had already mentioned it earlier or not. I don't know, but it hasn't actually been mentioned previously, so like a bit of narrative dissonance there where the reader's like, disqualification? What? I say no, but I saw it in Melee, and while I think it's a little bit of kicking a dog while they're down, I do understand the disqualification. So Melee is a site that like is used for information about the event. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, whatever. I was gonna say like we've described ourselves as super emotional and being unable to like control ourselves and talking to people and stuff, and but probably like somebody showed their phone or something. I don't know. Anyway, that's fine. I did not appeal. I'm not interested in continuing without PT hopes anyway. I want to like hello. It is worth noting that this is an explicit statement that Brad's actions are motivated by his Pro Tour qualification hopes, not fairness. He has talked a lot about fairness and how this is unfair and how this isn't the right way to do things and stuff like that. About his match loss, which made it much harder for him to qualify for the Pro Tour. But for a disqualification where he already thinks he's not going to qualify for the Pro Tour anyway, he has no interest in fighting it at all. Which suggests that like fairness isn't really what he cares about here. He cares about trying to win the match of Magic, which isn't fairness. Anyway, I apologize to the judge for my outburst. I share that I don't like how I was treated and that my response was very human considering the circumstances, but that still I want to apologize. This is such a bad apology. I apologize to the judge for my outburst in the middle. By the way, I don't like how I was treated, and I think that my response was very human considering the circumstances. But still, I want to apologize. That's a really bad apology. There is no ownership in any part of this document of any action that was negative. None. Anyway, he says, I understand. Empty again. He does not understand. Based on what? Anyway, it would become clear that this was true in a few more minutes. I also shared that I really appreciate the judge number 4 actually heard me and that I didn't like how he and the other judges treated me. They made me feel like I wasn't human. Again, absolutely no ownership of his actions or respect for the judges and the fact that they have a job to do and like their job isn't to make him feel like he's human. Whatever that even means. They're just being super professional and fair to him, as far as I can tell from his own recollection of the events. I don't recollect exactly how I explained it, but later a friend whom I met IRL for the first time this weekend said he began tearing up while eavesdropping on our conversation, and he had to walk away. He starts to say, I understand again, and I ask him to please not say I understand again. He agrees, but struggles to find other words. Like, yeah, I think probably the judges are like trained to say I understand. And I don't know, why not just let them do it and recognize that they're trained in de-escalation? Because we don't have control of our emotions and stuff, I guess, but also we're not displaying empathy for other people here, right? Like it's not a proud moment. I think we even exchanged a brief smile or chuckle. He did find words other than I understand, but I don't remember what they were. Well, it's great that he went through all that work for you, Brad. I try to wrap up the conversation as the ruling is final. My DQ is final, and I know there's nothing I can do at this point besides root for Adam. Judge number 3 declines to my attempt to end the conversation. One more thing, he says. You're kicked out of the magic hall. My jaw drops. I can't just hang out here with my friends? No. He invites me to enjoy the rest of DreamHack, but I cannot be in the magic hall. Ask if I can appeal? No, this is my hall. Kicked while I'm down. Again. Judge 3, again. I want to, again. When he says, no, this is my hall, I want to, because he's not stating who judge number 3 is here, right? They say they will get the DreamHack head judge. That's who judge number 3 is. So... who are you going to appeal to? Just one problem, Brad. Appeal to who, Brad? Anyway, kicked while I'm down. Again, I go through the 7 stages of grief in a single moment for the umpteenth time in the last hour. I calmly ask, how do you sleep at night? Remember what I said? That whenever he's doing something bad, it's really calm. I calmly ask, how do you sleep at night? Where's the judges? I calmly ask if there's anywhere where I might be able to break something. I make a precision toss of my backpack. It was a perfectly safe and clean exchange. That one's not that doesn't use the word calm, but we're still calm there, right? But the rest of the time we talk a lot about how uncalm we are. Yeah, I think we mentioned that before. Okay. I calmly ask, how do you sleep at night before walking out of the hall and sitting alone on the steps to DreamHack. I was unable to follow up with Jessica or with the one judge who helped me. The judges found another way to break my heart. Can we are we cognizant of how we're talking about interactions with Jessica here? I just want to know. Anyway, if you read this far, all I can say is thank you for hearing out my story. Unfortunately, I don't have some revelatory statement or exciting call to action to end on for you. I decided to be a human first and a magic player second. Again? This is just not true. You decided not to play magic. And there's nothing that makes you human about not playing magic when you show up to a magic tournament. I gave everything I had and I lost in a devastating fashion that I could never have imagined. So that's that. That is the post about IDW that I wanted to share, and that's my video about it. And I don't know. 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 I just don't know. Yeah. My general observation is just emotionally manipulative people, or at least people who are being emotionally manipulative. I won't say that Brad is always emotionally manipulative. He's being very emotional now, and I think is using those emotions to manipulate, but maybe that's not what he's like on a good day, you know? It isn't that hard to tell that someone's being emotionally manipulative. And I think that a lot of the people observing this event and these things happening do think things like you should respect event staff who are running an event for you. And you shouldn't lose your temper and yell at an event. And maybe also you shouldn't throw up a 5-page document saying that the event staff, an event that you got disqualified and kicked out from, made you feel like you weren't a human and were terrible and stuff. I think a lot of us feel that way, but I think some of us who feel that way are still able to read a document like this and like um have the emotions in it resonate with us in a way that makes us think that the document is right and the things that it says are reasonable and makes us feel sympathy for the protagonist of the document. Um, but you know, in order to really successfully have empathy as human beings here, we have to also think about like the other people in the room, like the judges. Did they try their best to act professionally in enforcing this really weird rule that is sometimes controversial? As far as I can tell, they did. Like, seems like it to me, and I don't even think it's that close. And I feel like if there wasn't this big emotional diatribe about it, like, we wouldn't even be having the conversation because you're not allowed to look at the top card of your deck during your opponent's turn in a tournament for $100,000 plus. And I just don't think that's that weird a thing to observe. So, yeah, I thought it was really interesting. Um, I just thought it was really interesting, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit recently, and I wanted to share it with you. And I hope you enjoyed my take and analysis on it all.